Welcome to Propaganda Loves You, the show that asks and answers the question, if the government's no longer fighting disinformation, who is? I'm your host for this week, Kodie, joined by Arthur and Joe.
Ask not what your country can do for you. Ask what you can do for your country.
We shall fight on the beaches. We shall fight on the landing grounds.
Mr. Gorbachev, tear down this wall.
All right, welcome back to part 4 of our Disinformation Deep Dive series. So, in parts 1 and 2, we kind of talked about the global stage for disinformation and the major players on that, major foreign players. We didn't talk about the U.S. so much. We will have our own series on the U.S. But we talked about, Russia is kind of like the country that has modernized disinformation and really kind of set the stage for a lot of other countries to follow. We talked about Iran, North Korea, and China and how they approach disinformation and propaganda a little bit, even into their own countries. In part 3, we talked through what countries are doing to counter disinformation, which ones are working well, using Finland as an example of a country that has kind of made it a whole of society problem. They've really looked at the problem as something that needs to be solved at the societal level.
It's like an educational thing for them, right? Like they start from a young age teaching people about how to be media literate and understand all that.
Exactly. Yep. It's been a huge portion for them. And then how the U.S. has kind of abandoned most of its countering disinformation apparatus. So today, we're going to talk about the NGOs and different citizen groups that fight back against disinformation, also from an academia standpoint. And then we're going to walk through just a few recommendations we have on things that you can do in your own life to hopefully counter disinformation that you might be encountering in the media ecosphere. So just to start off, what we'll talk through here is kind of like a couple organizations in the United States, what they do, and then we'll talk about a few European organizations, and then just some open source citizens alliance type groups. So to start, the one I wanted to mention is the Stanford Internet Observatory, which was stood up at Stanford, and it was run by Renee DiResta. If you've heard her name before, it was probably in the context of she's done a ton of research work in the past, but she was part of the Netflix show, The Social Dilemma. She was interviewed as part of that. Her team at the Stanford Internet Observatory also did the research that contributed to the report on the Russian interference in 2016 election that they gave to the Senate. She appeared in front of the Senate Intelligence Committee and explained how Russia influenced the election, what they did, the Internet Research Agency and their bot operations and everything like that. So, that was a huge part of it. This organization has actually also been shut down. It was attacked in the United States by multiple Republican senators and was basically held up in lawsuits from the House Judiciary Committee and other organizations like within the U.S. And eventually, because of these lawsuits, it shut down, even though the Supreme Court actually have ended up coming out and siding in Stanford's favor. It was costing them basically millions of dollars to fight back against these lawsuits. So they shut down this entire organization that had been set up for this and pretty much released everybody. So Renee DiResta, she now works at Georgetown as one of their research associates in a relatively new program that they have over there. It's looking at essentially how technology is being used to shape public opinion today. Wanted to mention one organization that was pretty widely cited as doing great work and was also immediately attacked and shut down. Well, not immediately, but within a few years shut down because of that. I think it was 2024. Not a great start for our organizations and academia that are fighting back against this. But the other one in the U.S. that I wanted to mention, the Alliance for Securing Democracy, ASD. This organization is still up and running. So the Alliance for Securing Democracy, what they do is they do a lot of different work on, obviously, disinformation. They look at different threat actors. Here you can see China, Iran, Russia, the main ones that they actually look at. They look at elections, election security, anything that's been going on in those. Their main focus areas, information manipulation, the war in Ukraine, finance, emerging technology, and cybersecurity. And they do put out quite a few publications on these different things. So that's policy papers or reports on different threat actors. It's pretty it's good information. It's really in-depth research. I think, and this is going to be kind of a reoccurring theme, some of the problems that I see with a lot of these organizations is they're very academically minded and they're not written for the general populace to consume most of the time, which is part of the problem with this. You have to have some sort of inherent knowledge around disinformation to really read these and understand everything that they're talking about and get it on the first run through. So that's kind of just a reoccurring thing that I've noticed with a lot of these different organizations, but they do put out a lot of really good information on the different organizations or the different threat actors, how they're trying to influence people, like the actual actions that they're taking, specific misinformation that's been coming out, and how that actually works. So that's the ASD. They also, just on how they actually get funded, it's from the German Marshall Fund. I didn't really know what this was, so I went and looked it up. The German Marshall Fund was actually a fund that Germany paid to the United States after World War II, after the Marshall Plan, which is basically how they rebuilt Germany. And so that fund is actually one of the major things that this organization uses to actually, fund its work, essentially, is money that came from that specific fund that was built in response to the Marshall Plan and World War II from Germany. So they also take money from just private philanthropic efforts and whatnot as well. So it's not a government agency. If the German Marshall Fund you thought that was part of it, it's not directly connected to the government. That is the Alliance for Securing Democracy, also a U.S. organization. Okay, then let's talk a little bit about the American Sunlight Project. We have talked about this before. I know I've mentioned this, but it was formed in 2024 by Anita Jankowicz, who was the head of the Department of Homeland Security Disinformation's governance board that was very short-lived and shut down quickly after it was stood up. Nina went and basically started the American Sunlight Project, which its stated goals. So the mission, I'm going to read their statement. In an era of unprecedented information threats, from artificial intelligence to foreign interference to individuals sharing false or misleading information for power or profit, the American Sunlight Project is mobilizing to ensure that citizens have access to trustworthy sources of information and choices they make in their daily lives. They focus on three main areas. That's to expose deceptive information practices and the networks and money that drive them, to educate the public about the threats that we face and the effects of disinformation on society. And then they also engage with policymakers to return truth to our national discourse. So this is a reading off of their three main focus areas that they work on. What does that mean, in terms of tangible, what you can get? Well, you could sign up for their weekly newsletter. They do push that out that kind of looks at what disinformation is occurring in the United States. It's definitely a U.S. focused program. And they also do some interesting things when it comes to training. So you can go, they actually have educational events. Let me jump onto their events page really quick. This is just one example, some upcoming events that they had listed on here. This one's back from March, but information literacy crash course. So they do different online events there. The one that's more recent, I think, was this one, the AI encoded inside the hallucination machine. I think one of their lead researchers actually leads this talk, so you can actually go and get more information from them. Most of these are webinar stuff, but they've got all of this information on their main page, the American Sunlight Project, if you go to events. And you can see what they kind of offer. Also, what's this other one? Let's look, OSINT. So open source intelligence is what OSINT is. And so that's just talking through how you can do kind of open source intelligence collection, the tools that are available, the tools that are out there for you to do that. So they offer a lot of different things here from, like I mentioned, the publications, putting out research reports on different disinformation operations from different countries, and then also this education piece, so training people and giving them opportunities to learn more about how to identify this themselves. So that's the big things I wanted to mention here when it comes to the American Sunlight Project and the U.S. organization. So that's the three that we're going to hit on today in the U.S. Any questions or thoughts on the role that these organizations are playing or the work that they're trying to do?
Yeah, I'm just having education on the back of my mind when you're saying all this, thinking about Finland as the model you pointed to. And, on a large social scale, of course, we want to have a K through 12 approach to media literacy and making sure children from a young age understand how to read information online and understand biases and different narratives, how to pick them apart for ourselves and for our audience, like talking to adults here who either did or didn't, or to some minor degree got some education about media literacy. And so I'm wondering if there's a curriculum. Like, I know they offer these courses and stuff at American Sunlight Project, but is there like, the equivalent of a certificate or a master's program or something like that that people can go to get training in media literacy, where you actually, not only have information that you consume about disinformation, but also things that you produce that demonstrate your ability to comprehend and process and sort of deconstruct this information, if there are organizations that do that kind of adult education type thing that you're aware of.
Yep. Actually, the next piece that we're going to talk about here, when we're thinking about what Europe is doing in this manner, one of the organizations that I wanted to talk to you about Europe is the European Digital Media Observatory. This is like I would say like the gold standard over in the EU for disinformation and how they counter disinformation. And they have kind of what you're talking about. I don't know if it's a certificate or whatnot that they do, but they have actual guidelines, things that you can refer back to when it comes to media literacy. I don't know if I see like a specific class or anything that like would end with some sort of certification or not here. So like trying to basically create some standards when it comes to media literacy and how to look at media, right? So definitely they've got like a lot of information around it, but I don't know, Joe, if they've got a specific course that you're thinking of.
Yeah, because like when I'm thinking about solutions to disinformation and propaganda and stuff like that, it comes fundamentally down to the way you look at media. It's not just about paying attention. It's about being very, very intentional about how you pay attention, right? About not immediately trusting something that just seems to come from a legitimate source, about looking at it one way and then taking a step back and saying, okay, how might I be confused or deluded about the way I first looked at it? Let me look at it again a second way from a different angle. Let me look at it a third way from a different angle. And yeah, I guess what I would love to see is some open source, freely available curriculum that anyone could do online. And there may be YouTube channels even that are already doing some of this stuff that have curriculums like this worked out. But yeah, it's a way for individuals to retrain themselves in how to look at media, if that makes sense.
Yeah. I think that's something that we should look into more on our side. Like the best ofs and the guides that come out from some of the EU organizations are probably something that would be good to model after. They've done a lot of the work, right? And I think it's taking that and getting those resources into a place that's easy for people to access. But then also maybe there's a recommended path there, right? Like go through X from this organization and then review the crash course in media literacy from American Sunlight Project. Maybe there's something that we could put together on that, like after we kind of do some of these things ourselves, or maybe just in researching, we'll find, one that exists. Hopefully that'd be ideal. Like, if there's one that's already out there, that's good. Hey everyone, it's Kodie. After recording this episode, we did do some additional research into existing programs K through 12 on media literacy, and we did find some. So at the end of the conversation here, there'll be another quick insert from me talking through some of the K through 12 programs that we actually discovered, and we'll have those in the show notes so that you're able to go and check those out at your leisure. Arthur, any questions or thoughts on the U.S. side of it?
Yeah, I like the function of the ASP where they name names and hold domestic actors accountable. The weariness I have and the creeping effect is when the government or state is abdicating its monopoly on what truth is. It's like these private organizations from either private universities or think tanks have to step in to replace and function under the guise of balance and fairness of what truth is, rather than a government in another country in Europe or Finland where they safeguard the public sphere of knowledge and truth, which if we're spending our taxpayer dollars, that's what it should be going towards. And yet you're just highlighting, here's a great project and it got shut down
Yeah.
by the Republicans.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And it's like, it's interesting because I think like the next portion that we were going to talk about was kind of like some of those different think tanks, right, that are out there that like we still have think tanks in the United States that write policy papers and they talk about this sort of thing, but they do it at such a level that it's like no one's going to go read like a Rand report on, the destabilization of truth, right? Or what are like some people will, but like are the people that actually need that information going to go and seek that out from like Rand or Brookings Institute or something like that? Like probably not. Like it takes some sort of translation or like Joe, like you said, some sort of dedicated effort to create a course, something that, would make it easier and more accessible for people to get access to that information. And the interesting thing about like the Brennan Center and the Rand Corporation both have done efforts on this. I think Rand, it's countering truth decay is what they've been working on since like 2018, and they continue to update it. It's talking about like why this is occurring and looking at why is it that people are having less trust in institutions and why are people susceptible to this type of information versus like how do we strengthen ourselves against it. And then I think the Brennan Center, what they had basically talked about, they put out an article that was titled, this was 2022, that the government shouldn't be barred from countering false information, which kind of is in direct response to anything that comes up that smells like disinformation governance or anything built to counter these things immediately gets attacked, like you said. And so we've got think tanks coming up with saying, no, the government has a role in this. But again, like it almost doesn't matter because it's just drowned out completely from like any part of the national conversation. Like it just is not, I don't know exactly where my head's going with that, but I think I'm just like kind of circling around what you said, Joe. Like, how do you take this information from where it's at and the people that are listening to it and getting it to a broader audience in a way that's easy to digest and also like wanting them to listen to it? I mean, that's partially why we're doing this, but there needs to be something that's more, I guess, what's the word? Robust.
That's kind of the problem, though. If it gets robust or if it gets too in the public sphere, that's when they shut it down.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's hard when the oligarchs are on the lookout for anybody who's trying to educate your fellow people, and they're like, no, stop it. Be stupid. Consume what we tell you. I did a quick Google on media literacy resources, and turns out maybe West Coast is the best coast after all. There's this thing from California Department of Education. They seem to have a pretty good resource page dedicated. It seems like it's mostly dedicated to educators, but it could be a handful of resources we look into just to share for average people to educate themselves. They seem to have a good, I mean, I just literally just Googled and glanced at it, so I'm not like familiar with this, but it seems like California has a law, and the quote they have from their law is to ensure that young adults are prepared with media literacy skills necessary to safely, responsibly, and critically consume and use social media and other forms of media. So this is in compliance with that law they have to educate their young people as they should. But yeah, maybe we don't have to reinvent the wheel. There may be already organizations out here doing this stuff.
Yeah, and I think like that's one of the things that I liked about the American Sunlight Project. Like actually a lot of these organizations, what they tend to do is have some sort of like coalition area. Like if you look on the American Sunlight Project, they've got their media section, but it's not just what they put out, right? Like they're pulling in different articles from all over the place that are relevant to the content that we're interested in here or relevant to the topic that they're really interested in. So like some trying to curate this a bit. And then for some of the European ones that we'll talk about, they do something similar where they're trying to really pull resources into centralized locations to help people find that. So yeah, maybe that's what we can do too from grab that link, Joe. We could add it to our webpage or something for people to go to. But the one other thing I did want to mention was for the Alliance for Security and Democracy people, they also have this dashboard that's kind of interesting that talks through or can kind of show you what's trending and where these certain topics are likely coming from and how viral some of these disinformation campaigns are getting. So like I haven't used it a ton, but it is interesting just to see. The only ones that they focus on here though are Russia, China, and Iran. So it's definitely biased towards just looking at those actors. But it is looking at what is coming from a Russian diplomat government section and then how is it trending across different platforms. So you can kind of get an idea of how disinformation spreads and trends. That is an interesting tool that they've got here. If you're interested in checking that out, we'll link to that as well.
I like the name of their website, Securing Democracy.
Yeah. So like moving on from the US and kind of like some of the different disinformation groups there, I want to talk about Europe for a second. Europe is definitely, I mean, it's ahead of the US for sure in how they kind of think about disinformation and how they counter disinformation. So I mentioned it, but the European Digital Media Observatory, it started in 2020. And the thing that I find interesting about this, or I don't know if interesting is the right word, but I think like from an American context, when we think of disinformation or really anything that crosses the US, we have the benefit of, it all being in English, pretty much being the main language, right? Like obviously you want to probably have it in Spanish as well. But in Europe, they've got this problem where a ton of different countries. So they have to think through this and like, okay, how do we do this in a way that can translate to everybody? The European Digital Media Observatory, one of the things that they did, they've got different hubs all across Europe so that they're able to translate into multiple languages and try and get the information out to these different countries as quickly as possible. So we just showed like the Hamilton dashboard for the Securing Democracy, Alliance for Securing Democracy. What EDMO has is kind of like a fact-checking map report. It's like an interactive report here where basically you can kind of click and see like what are the stories that are coming up and like where they're coming from. And it's brings you almost to like it's not a Snopes article, but similar to like a Snopes article, like fact-checking what those major stories are. So it kind of gives you a more interactive way to look at what are the messages that have been trending recently. They do a lot, like I mentioned, in the media literacy space. So they do have like standards and guidelines that they push out when it comes to media literacy, specifically understanding like what the media literacy is in general. And then you can see they've got like online classes or things that you can listen to, a lot of different resources that they have on here in a lot of different languages so that it can reach the largest group possible across Europe. And then, they also have like specific areas that they're focused in on, like all of these groups do. And I think the big ones that kind of transfer across the US and the European organizations are like anywhere there's a crisis or conflict. So like war in Ukraine, the Israel-Hamas conflict or war, genocide, whatever you're going to call it. But basically all of these are here. And then elections and artificial intelligence are like the big ones that kind of always are showing up on all of the different disinformation sites, which I thought was interesting. It's just where most of this is occurring. Yeah, we could spend more time here, but any thoughts on anything that we want to hit on here?
I love how they treat truth as like a structural public problem and they invest in it and there's organization behind it and it's cross country lines. There's a lot of good. It seems like it's a great gold standard and I'm going to check it out a lot more. I also know like in Europe, a lot of their platforms are regulated, unlike the US. So I'm sure that contributes a lot to it too. Having regulation and I don't know. It sounds crazy when you say like, oh, they regulate their platforms and they invest in this and they're way ahead of us. It seems very obvious the steps needed to take. But they're not profiting off of it, We're profiting.
That's true.
So who's really winning?
They're not making money with these organizations, that's for sure.
Yeah.
And just to kind of close out on Europe here, there's, just because this is not the only organization that stood up to fight disinformation, the EDMO, regional countries also have some. So I think like Germany has the Center for Monitoring, Analysis, and Strategy, it's CMAS, as what they're called. They focus on some similar themes, right? The website is all in German. Unfortunately, my German is not good enough to translate this. Some of the themes and what they monitor for, far right issues, conspiracies, anti-democratic movements, things of those natures. And the other one that is in Lithuania is called debunk.org. And that's kind of like the Baltics leading disinformation watchdog. Again, like following artificial intelligence and really focusing on Russian propaganda, which makes sense if you're in a Baltic country, why that would be like your main focus there, just because of the history on that. We talked about them when we were talking about some of the disinformation campaign organizations that actually exposed some of the bot activity from different Russian information campaigns. And I think we linked to them previously. So all different groups, none of them have been shut down by their own government. So that's, a plus that they've got going for them. But yeah, that's what I want to hit on here for kind of like the specific groups before we go into just open source and talk about some of the individual citizen-led organizations. So anything else we want to hit on for kind of like these NGOs or think tanks or nonprofits?
This is really just sort of like an open-ended question. Like, I don't have the answer for it. I don't know if any of us do or not, but I'm just thinking about our general, I don't know, US/European centered approach to this and how big the world is. And I'm curious if there are any Asian organizations, South American organizations, African organizations that are doing this work of educating people about disinformation and misinformation and propaganda. And I'm just curious what we're missing when we look to the US and Europe as the places that are responsible for all this. If we're thinking about ourselves as part of a growing global community of people online trying to interact with each other and understand the world on common terms. Yeah, I'm curious if there are other organizations around the world that we're not aware of yet that are doing some of this work.
That's a good question. I do know, like from Brazil, like their standpoint, they've actually taken a pretty strong stance. When Twitter was active in Brazil and it was pushing disinformation, like their government was going to block all of Twitter from Brazil unless they took steps to start combating disinformation. So like there are definitely things happening in other governments and other areas of the world, South America, and that's probably going on in some of the Asian countries. I would imagine that like Japan and South Korea have to have some sort of strong disinformation mechanism there. Yeah, I don't know, Joe. Definitely something that we should look into because I'm sure we're missing some there. I would not doubt it. Probably something.
Yeah, like I said, just something for us to think about in the future. The internet is creating a globalized community, and whether or not English becomes like the lingua franca or whatever the fancy word for that is, we've got to be able to talk about this common place we have called the internet that we're trying to relate to each other on. I feel like it's especially how monolingual we are in the US. Like, I'm just often jealous of people who grew up in other countries and they just naturally learn 3 or 4 different languages, and how I wish that had been more of a thing in our education system.
Yeah.
But yeah, curious what we're missing through our white Western bias.
I bet we miss a ton. Yeah. Like I'm sure we miss a ton from like I was like, when you said that initially, I really was thinking of like, what would South Korea need to be doing right now, like to counter like North Korean propaganda? Like there has to be something there. I'm sure that's probably pretty significant. Or Japan and like proximity to China, and I don't know if Hong Kong like had something that they were doing as well, or even like what China does. I mean, yeah, China has a lot of control over in their internal communications and whatnot, but I'm sure that they have something as well to counter propaganda from outside of China from taking hold. So yeah, it would be interesting to do a deep dive on that and see what exists there. All right, so to kind of close out the organizations that are fighting back against disinformation and propaganda, I'm just going to hit on these two really quick because these are kind of open source intelligence organizations that they also sell, well, at least in the terms of Graphica, the first one I want to talk about. We talked about Graphica in the past. They were the ones that did the really in-depth reports on both secondary infection, which was one of Russia's disinformation campaigns where they were dropping fake stories and then kind of like deleting the original poster so that they could see how it trends without that and you couldn't track it back. And then China's spamiflage campaign, which was significant bot activity. So they had basically created the reports on that. But Graphica also sells products like how to do this mapping and intelligence. It'll sell access to some of their open source intelligence capabilities. So there's a funding component there, but they also provide reporting for free. So that's one open source organization. Also, if you've heard of Bellingcat, Bellingcat was started, I can't remember exactly when it was started, but it is like one of the premier open source investigative reporting organizations out there. Not solely focused on disinformation. It is part of one of the areas that they look at. They've done things like, I think they did a track back. They're founded in 2014. They investigated the shooting down of flight MH17 over eastern Ukraine. They also had done investigations tracking Russian operatives when they were poisoning people in the EU with irradiated material that they would drop into people's drinks and they would die from radiation poisoning. They were able to do open source analysis to track this back to Russia and where it originally came from. It's a really interesting organization that does a lot of that. They try to recreate intelligence that you might see if you're in an intelligence community or something like that, or working for a government, and then pushing that out to normal people. So yeah, two organizations there in the OSINT side that are kind of interesting to watch and generally have some good information if you're interested in the areas that they follow. We already kind of talked about the think tanks and what they do. The one that we haven't really hit on is just kind of like citizen-led movements. And I brought this up a couple times and excited to get to talk about them. But Nafo, so it's the North Atlantic Fellow Organization. And this is essentially just, it started out kind of as a joke in response to the war in Ukraine. So it was like a lot of people were trying to, I guess, anti-troll. I think like one of the things that they called it was creating like, if you have trolls that are out there trying to cause division or whatnot, then you have like elves that are out there trying to counter that, was the story that was kind of part of this. It basically stood up as just individuals on the internet that would go onto Russian state individuals' accounts when they were posting blatant propaganda and would just start memeing them and trying to debunk the propaganda right up front. They would swarm, right? A ton of different people would swarm onto accounts at the same time whenever disinformation was being spread and try to win the comment battle. It was effective to the point where like they were actually referenced from like the Russian government themselves, like the whole Nafo movement, like saying that these guys are propagandists. The cool thing about it is it's not like a centralized group. Like you could almost think of it like anonymous, except these people aren't anonymous, but there's no specific leadership chain. There's no organizational structure. It's essentially a bunch of people that all have a common goal or common belief. And the structure is really just around like, well, you know, the Shibu Inu meme is kind of their calling card that they use when they go on like these different reply warfare battles, or whatever you want to call it, to drown out the pro-Russian voice in a lot of these areas. So they've also taken this one step further and basically been able to use the influence that they've gained and the notoriety they've gained to raise money for Ukrainian units in Ukraine that are actually fighting, right? So they would go on, and some of the more famous accounts would post like, hey, we're trying to raise like $1,000 for this specific unit in Ukraine to get better body armor. I'm like making up what it is that they actually do. But like they've done that multiple times and have raised like millions of dollars in support for the Ukrainian military, also different humanitarian causes in Ukraine. So I just wanted to mention that because, Joe, I think like we talked about the, like, what is it? Hashtag hijacking or things that people have done in Palestine that's similar, where they take like trending topics and then interject information about what's going on in Palestine into those to spread awareness. So similar concept here, but really I think the thing that's fighting back through a medium that more people are used to interacting with when it comes to like memes or like that kind of popular culture type of conversation. So I thought it was interesting, you know, starts on its own, doesn't necessarily have any specific organizational government backing or anything like that, but shows to be kind of an effective way to fight back against this when you've got enough people. But yeah, any thoughts or anything there?
I think the open source community, like that's a really cool thing where, they're like citizen investigators and hobbyists. It's really cool that people are standing up and demanding accountability. It's just kind of sad, I guess, that it could just be baked into society as a public good that's agreed upon. And you just have this system instead.
I mean, instead of having some sort of centralized response to this, we were like, well, it's great that these guys are doing this like from a grassroots level. It's like we should have something more effective, right? More like coordinated, and yet this is like what we've got kind of thing.
Yeah,
Is
just
that
like,
what you're thinking?
yeah, I guess just like there should just be like an objective truth maybe, and the whole way that like we have media in the US and the ability to like lie, and it's just, I don't know, it's like all for profit. It's like that we care about engagement and views over truth. And like, yeah, we should
Yeah.
all just be adopting Finland's policies on most things.
That's fair.
I kind of want to do a quick academic thing, I guess. If you're interested in philosophy and political theory and stuff, I know Arthur, you studied a lot of philosophy and political science and everything. There's a book by a woman named Wendy Brown called Undoing the Demos, Neoliberalism's Stealth Revolution. And I used to teach a chapter of it to my first year writing students because she has a chapter about higher education and how the whole higher education system has been hijacked by this concept of neoliberalism. And that's kind of what I want to mention is just this word neoliberalism. You've probably heard thrown around a lot just as a jargony kind of term. But what it really points to is specifically what's wrong with our US culture right now. It's this idea that the profit motive has to be involved in everything. Every aspect of human society is quantified and monetized and made to turn a profit in some way. And so we have a hard time finding, like we're sitting here talking about ways to educate people about disinformation and propaganda, and all the options are like, oh, you got to pay to go to a school or pay for this service or pay for that thing. And we culturally we've lost our ability to create systems that are good for everybody that don't require payment. There's a lot of work that needs to be done in the world in terms of taking care of people. And it's becoming harder and harder to find ways to do that work outside of the profit motive, right? This is what neoliberalism is all about, is how the profit ideology gets spread through every part of society. So if you ever hear that word neoliberalism, you're like, what are they talking about? They're talking about how the profit motive has corrupted our ability to just think through basic human problems, like how to feed, clothe, and house people, right? So yeah, I just wanted to plug that book for any nerds who feel like doing some additional reading. It's a great book. And if you are annoyed by people throwing around the term neoliberalism, this is what they mean, or what they should mean when they use it, is this profit motive spreading through every aspect of the culture.
I think that also hits on another reason why this is so difficult, because it's profitable to spread propaganda. Like it is profitable to spread disinformation. Like you will get paid to do that, but to fight back against it, it relies on people, just normal people supporting you, right? Like that's the only way that works right now anyway. That's awesome. Yeah, we'll definitely link to that book. Okay. All right. So that pretty much covers the main things we wanted to talk about in this intro series on disinformation, like just provide like this high level view of organizations that are fighting against it, like how those organizations are structured, the things that they really focus on. And just to kind of close out, I'm just going to read through a couple different recommendations or things that you can do in your own life to kind of help with disinformation. We collated these recommendations or tips, tricks from a number of various different sources. So we'll link to the original sources for all of these in the show notes. But this is kind of like a conglomeration of recommendations from multiple publications. You guys can just give me your hot takes, you agree or whatnot as we walk through each one of these. The first one, cultivate healthy skepticism, not cynicism. Disinformation thrives on emotional overreactions. When you encounter sensational, emotionally charged content, take a beat and ask, who created the content and what might they stand to gain? What evidence is provided and is verifiable? And has this been reported by multiple independent or credible sources? So any thoughts? Any thoughts on that one?
It's just like, is the context for this just like ways to approach like when you're scrolling or something? Like just average consumption of media? Like,
Yeah, it's just essentially like if you're going through media, like as you're encountering information, these are things that you can think about in order to make sure that what you're encountering, do you trust it as verifiable information? So it's like less about going and finding specific things to read or whatnot. It's more of like as you're browsing or your habits. Yeah.
yeah, I just think the energy question is sort of a variable here because I mean,
Mhm.
I've heard like my students before just in their writing assignments and stuff just admit that um I mean, people who've grown up with a cell phone in their hand now are college students, and they've had access
Mhm.
to this media since they were literally like little children, and like scrolling is just part of their winding down routine to go to sleep. Like they
Mhm.
literally admit that they can't relax enough to go to sleep without just spending some time scrolling on their social media at night. And the kind of energy people have mentally when they're doing that is not the kind of energy that it takes to do the things that some of these recommendations are asking, like verifying reports from credible sources and stuff. When you're just scrolling, like you've sort of dropped below the level of mental energy necessary to do that kind of work. And I think that's kind of a problem with the approach. Yeah, I don't know. I don't know. It's not a
Yeah.
very helpful thing to say, but I just feel like it's a great I don't have any problem with the recommendation on itself. I'm just recognizing that in the practice of the way people use it, most people aren't gonna do it.
Yeah, I think that's a problem with a lot of these, right? The recommendations is that they all depend on additional work outside of your initial habits. Well, that's not entirely true. Like when we go through some of them, as far as like um, diversifying your information diet, right? Like that's a good thing. I think we'll hit that criticism probably on half of these. It does require that additional next step. The next one is vet the source, the author, and the platform. You can check the outlet. Is it something that you actually trust? Do you know the author of the article? Does the domain look right? You know, is it like actually CNN.com or is it CNN.com? Right? Like something like, so maybe there's like minor things that you can do there, but, and maybe for this one, there's things that you can do prior, like the scrolling thing you're talking about. Like if people are just going to like go scroll through at the night, maybe you need to set up like whatever your platform of choice is. Maybe if it's Reddit, you need to set up a second account that's like going to bed scrolling and only subscribe to like, you know, Reddit, the like subreddits that are non-political or not going to have news, and it's just like cat feeds or something. I don't know. Like maybe that's a way that you can kind of like curate your information diet for when you're looking at it, right?
That's a really good idea.
Yeah.
I like that.
So your bedtime social media accounts.
Yeah. It's a bit like authoritarian, but like, how in China, video games are such a problem that they actually limit the internet access of people who play video games. It's like an hour a day or something for children under the age of 18. And once you hit it, you're cut off for the day. So like, I don't know, like it's a bit like dictatorial, but like something like that, but like a socialist thing
Yeah,
that's like good. Yeah.
I like it. All right. This one's kind of similar. It's basically like cross-verify startling claims. So like we talked about, like, and you see this in multiple different locations or reports, but yeah, like if you see something that pops up and you're like, whoa, that's crazy. Like just, you know, maybe check and see if there's coming from a few different articles, right? Like that have the similar thing there. This is another one that's going to be an issue with like the amount of tool or the amount of time, but use fact checking and verification tools, right? Like there are fact checking sites, Snopes, Polyfact, like those, and you know, the other ones that we talked about, like I can't remember the one from Lithuania, debunk.org or something like that. Image and video verification tools, Google Lens, that can like try to find deep fakes or manipulated media. And then different browser tools can provide like in-browser credibility ratings. NewsGuard, that's actually one I didn't know about. So that's kind of interesting. You can get credibility ratings directly on the website. But again, like any of those tools that you're using, you have to understand where the tool is coming from, who owns the tool, blah, 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 like all of that as well. Because you don't know how that could actually influence there. And then we've talked about this a lot, but recognizing and regulating your own emotional triggers, you know, propaganda is most convincing when it provokes emotional responses. So understanding like if I am getting angry over a comment or over an article or something like that, trying to understand why that is. This one's less intensive of like trying to go find a tool or go research something, but more introspective that anyone could really do. Just take a moment to pause and reflect and think for a second before moving on and making your judgment or whatnot based on an article.
Yeah, I mean, maybe I've thought about this before. Maybe that's a decent deep dive topic for me to think about doing an episode on or whatever. I would love to just talk about some basic mindfulness techniques for self-awareness and understanding what your triggers are and understanding mentally how to take a step back and really reflect on your embodied emotional experience as you encounter information in the world. Rely on these things every single day. If I'm looking at the news, I'm like, okay, something's happening in here. This feels bad. Let me pause for a minute and think about how this feels and why I'm reacting to it the way I am. For me, I have really, really strong emotional reactions that come up when I see propaganda being spread, especially when it's reinforcing some oppressive regime, like some anti-Palestinian stuff that's just really nasty and racist. And I see that spreading online and I get really, really upset about it when I see it. And I have to really think about, what am I doing with this information? Am I just consuming it right now because I'm bored and I want to consume things? Is that good for me? Should I stop? Do I actually want to post and correct some of this stuff? Am I prepared to do something about it, or is it just making me feel bad for no good reason? There are all kinds of different ways to approach your media consumption in this way, but yeah, some basic mindfulness techniques would help people out a lot, I think.
And that actually, I'm going to skip around a little bit because I think that goes directly into number 8, which is like choose constructive engagement when it's appropriate, right? Like you don't have to comment back on every single Facebook post, or like you don't have to fight back in like that way, right? Just thinking through like, where does this actually make sense? Like, am I talking to a person that, actually responds to like this type of engagement, or is it just going to solidify their opinion or a point, or do I even know this person, right? Is it worth my time and mental effort to like mental health to engage on that? Like, I think that one makes a lot of sense there. And then these last two I'm going to group together. It's support truth-telling infrastructure and stay informed about how disinformation works, which if you're listening to this, like you're doing both of those things just by kind of listening to this show, I think, because hopefully we're trying to be truth-telling infrastructure here and we're trying to inform people on how these different things work and what to look for. But for those other organizations that we mentioned, right, like if it's a topic that interests you and you want more info, like those orgs that's all they do, right, for a lot of these. So like you can definitely check out any of the resources that we'll link into the show notes here. Check out their sites. You can get all of them have kind of like a sign up where you can get email updates from them. But yeah, any thoughts on those two? Support truth-telling infrastructure, stay informed about how disinformation works.
Yeah, I'm thinking about how you learn about the world. Like we have a current events approach. Everybody learns about what's happening now in different ways. And that's why I always recommend Democracy Now! Is just like a de facto kind of safe way to learn about some important current events. There's also the other side of it is self-education, is developing topics that you're curious about and being diligent about how you learn about those things. Reading is a great way to learn about them. Find a topic that matters to you and do some looking into who the authorities are on that topic and some basic history you can learn about it, and start picking up books and doing some reading. You need the fast and the slow you need the fast stuff to keep up with what's happening now. You need the slow self-education stuff to smooth out and correct biases in your own worldview. And this is like a never-ending process. Like I'm always trying to learn about myself as a learner and figure out the ways that I need to learn about the world. So yeah, that's my plug, I guess, is do the fast and the slow, and think really hard about, on the slow side, what you want to read about, what you want to learn about, what you're interested in, what your strengths are, etc.
I just learned about something, I don't know, Joe, maybe you know about this, but that you can rent out audiobooks from libraries now. Like you can check out audiobooks.
Have a
Like
library card. Get your library card.
Yeah.
Please get your
Yeah.
library card. Free stuff. The library is the best thing about the government by far, right? Library and the post office.
Yeah, I think that's it. That's mainly what we wanted to cover on our initial dive into disinformation. I think future deep dive episodes on disinformation would probably who knows exactly what we'll focus on, but I think we hit high level, really kind of scratching the surface on some of these things like the secondary infection or spamouflage. And the intent would be that now we can kind of go deep on those and talk all the intricate details. And if you've listened to the first 4 episodes, then hopefully be better prepared to listen to those episodes as well. But I think that's all I have. Any last comments from Joe, Arthur, anything you guys want to close out with?
My takeaway was that disinformation isn't just dangerous because it's lying to us. I really liked Joe's point about Wendy Brown's undoing the demos, and kind of like how the disinformation, it also, like, I guess the double-edged sword is like where it's lying to us, but it's also telling us to not expect the truth, eroding the democratic foundations and what's necessary for democracy. So overall, my takeaway is that it's a fight for what makes democracy possible. These NGOs are doing some really important work, and glad that they're being stood up by some great independent authorities. I wish that the public sphere in the US were like Europe, where it was a bit more organized and it was baked into the public good.
Yeah, I agree. All I was thinking there, all I could think about is like maybe we need to create like a Northwest Alliance or East Coast, West Coast Alliance, like New York and California could start working through like what is it, EU versus Disinfo is what they have. So we'd have like Pacific Northwest East Coast. I don't know, that's too long. We'll figure out an acronym, but something like that can combine our education resources for that. So that'd be a fun thing to go advocate for down in Albany. Hey everyone, before we sign off completely, I wanted to add a quick addendum to our episode on fighting disinformation. After we wrapped our main discussion, we did a bit more digging and found some great organizations with practical resources for everyone, from adults that are just looking to sharpen their skills, to parents, to educators looking for kind of like classroom materials related to media literacy. So shout out to the California Department of Education's media literacy resources page. So this is what Joe had initially found during the episode, but this is a basis for where a lot of this came from. It's a great starting point for anyone that wants to kind of dig deeper, and we'll make sure to link to that page in the show notes. But yeah, just a few key organizations and resources that they offer that we wanted to talk through related to media literacy. The first one up is the Institute for Strategic Dialogue, or ISD. ISD is a global independent nonprofit, and it works to counter polarization, extremism, and disinformation. They are deep in the trenches researching how hate and disinformation kind of spread online. And they use this data to develop real-world solutions and policy recommendations to protect democratic values. They offer, for adults, it offers a wealth of knowledge through their in-depth reporting and analysis. If you want to understand mechanics of modern disinformation campaigns, their research is a great place to start. And for K through 12, they do provide educational materials and programs designed to build resilience to extremism and polarization among young people. They have developed educational models that can be adapted to classrooms, used to help students navigate complex digital challenges. And they actually have a partnership with YouTube. So the Institute for Strategic Dialogue teamed up with YouTube to create an initiative called Be Internet Citizens. And what this is, it's a collaboration that kind of pairs ISD's expertise in extremism and disinformation with YouTube's platform, right? The Be Internet Citizens program is specifically designed to teach young people media literacy and critical thinking skills to prepare them for today's complex online world. So it moves beyond just identifying fake news and tries to help them understand the why behind it. For K through 12 schooling, this is kind of the core portion of the program. They developed a full curriculum with lesson plans and resources for educators to use in the classroom. It teaches students how to identify echo chambers and filter bubbles, spot misinformation and propaganda, understand unconscious bias, and even how to create their own positive content to build healthier online communities. And while the curriculum is really designed for students, the Be Internet Citizens video series on YouTube is a really good resource for pretty much anyone, parents, mentors, any adult that can watch these short, engaging videos, kind of better understand the digital landscape and find ways to talk about these important topics with young people. The next one I want to talk about is the Media Education Lab. The lab was founded by Renee Hobbs, a leading researcher and professor in the field from the Harrington School of Communication and Media at the University of Rhode Island. They are all about advancing media literacy education. They conduct research and create practical hands-on learning experiences. For adults, the lab provides fantastic professional development opportunities for educators, librarians, community leaders, through workshops in the renowned Summer Institute in digital literacy. They also have a ton of free online resources for adults looking to teach others. And then for K through 12 schooling, their website is a goldmine for educators. It's packed with curriculum resources, lesson plans, and activities for all grade levels that are designed to be engaging and thought-provoking for students. Another key player is the ISTE. I'm not sure if that's how they say it or not, but it's the International Society for Technology and Education. It's a nonprofit that serves educators and education leaders committed to harnessing technology for learning. They set the standard for how technology should be used in schools. A big part of that is ensuring that students are responsible and critical digital citizens. For adults, ISTE offers a framework called its ISTE Standards for Educators, which provides a roadmap for teachers to empower their students. They also offer online courses, webinars, and extensive publications on digital citizenship. And then for K through 12 schooling, the ISTE Standards for Students are kind of a cornerstone of their work. These standards guide students to become critical thinkers who can curate information, identify credible resources, and create and communicate their own ideas responsibly. And then finally, just on a global scale, one other organization we didn't mention is UNESCO. It's the United Nations Education, Scientific, and Cultural Organization. So they promote international cooperation on a bunch of fronts, but a major focus of that is ensuring that everyone has access to quality education and can navigate the information landscape safely. They offer resources for adults and K through 12. They're a leader in what they call MIL, or Media and Information Literacy. They've developed comprehensive global curriculum that can be adapted by countries and schools around the world. They publish a wealth of free materials, including handbooks, policy briefs, and guidelines that are foundational to the entire media literacy movement. And their work is perfect for policymakers, educators, or anyone that really kind of wants a global perspective. So yeah, just wanted to highlight a few more organizations that, focus on media literacy, can be used in the fight against information. And we will make sure to link to each one of these organizations in the show notes, and hopefully do kind of a deep dive in the future, specifically focused on maybe some of these organizations or even some interviews with the individuals leading these organizations. So that's it for today. Thanks for listening. That's it for this week's episode. Thanks so much for listening and hanging out with us.
If you enjoy the show, help us spread the word. Leave a rating or review and share it with your friends, family, or anyone you think would get something out of these conversations.
Your ratings, reviews, and shares help this show grow, and the more people listening, the harder it is for propaganda to win.
So until next time,
Stay aware, stay safe, and remember,
propaganda loves you.